the decline of the British pound as a reserve currency, and before that, the decline of the Dutch guilder as a reserve currency, all happened for the same reasons, which is, two things are going on. First of all, they're holding all of this dollars, and the stuff that we talked about is going on. And then also there's the weaponization through sanctions of the dollar. In other words, the United States' greatest weapon to use, as distinct from its military weapon, is sanctions. And so sanctions means you freeze other assets, you freeze assets. Those assets are the bonds. And so that happened with Russia, and there are threats of it with other countries, China and so on. And there's kind of the thinking, well, if I hold the bonds, can that happen to me? And then why am I transacting in this other third currency rather than transacting directly? So, for example, the United States share of world trade has declined, and China's share of world trade has increased to become greater. If two countries are trading, let's say Saudi Arabia is trading with China, why do they buy why do they go to the dollars in order to do that? No good reason to go to the dollars, and then they're worried about holding the dollars because they might get sanctioned. And so you see more of those transactions taking place in other currencies. And then the usefulness of the dollar as a storehold of wealth changes. It's like, think about it in the most fundamental way. Everybody wants a medium of exchange and a storehold of wealth. So in other words, if everybody's using the dollar in world trade, then you want to save in dollars because you say, okay, now that's the thing I spend in and I save in the dollars. But over time, as the share of world trade goes down, why aren't they denominating in like China has a larger share of world trade? Traditionally, the countries that have the world's reserve currency have the largest share of world trade and the largest share of world capital flows. And because the United States has declined, and also there's a worry about that, holding it because of sanctions. I mean, just imagine how the Chinese must feel about having a lot of money in treasury bonds. Like I would be worried that I would be treated like Russia would be treated. It's not something I would want to hold as, a safe asset. And other countries who might feel that they can get sanctioned. And for all those reasons, they're less inclined to hold. When we call dollars, what we're really calling is dollar debt, because you hold dollar debt. What is a debt? It's a promise to receive currency. Okay, so now getting out of those things and transacting in other currencies seems to be the safer thing to do for those countries. And so that's the dynamic that's taking place. So it's not an attack on the dollar. It's like, I don't want to hold those things. And so very similar to on the British pound, what happened is the British had the war and they were the most powerful empire ever in the world. And they had World War II, and they came out of World War II financially in debt, a lot of debt. Who held the debt? All these countries held the debt because that was the residual from that. But they had a problem. They had a debt problem. And so they needed to print more money because it was too much of a squeeze. And then you had, so it deteriorated, and then they sort of said, please hold my debt, please hold my debt. They went to Commonwealth countries, the part of those that were in the former British Empire. And then you had the Suez Canal incident where there's sort of a war, and everybody realizes, well, hey, wait a second, that British Empire ain't the British Empire, and they're heavily in debt. And then they say, I don't want to own that debt. And there went the British pound. So that's just how the mechanics work. The reason cycles exist is that the next stage has been determined by what has already happened in the prior stage. So we are in debt a lot. You can't change that. We got a lot of debt. And if you say, what could you do? I mean, two things come to mind. What you could do is you could be financially strong, and you can not use financial sanctions as a weapon to scare the holders of those bonds. But to be financially strong requires you to not spend more than you earn. That means you either have to cut your spending or raise your earnings. Okay, that ain't easy. Okay, so are we going to cut our spending? Okay, now you look at it. What are you going to, infrastructure programs, I don't know, poverty transfers, defense spending. Okay, what are we going to cut? Governments have the same basic economics as people, except for the fact that they can take money from one person and give it to another, and they can print money. That's it. And so when you look at this, you have that gap. You can eliminate the gap by taking money from some and eliminating another and not spending much. Okay, that's not easy, right? Most governments now don't think, how much money do I have to spend, and then how do I prioritize that? They think, I need to spend on this, I need to spend on that, and I need to spend on that, and they spend on it, and then they either produce a deficit, and then you either have to pay it back with hard money or printed money, and that's situation. So when you say, what could we do? Well, you've got to get financially strong in a politically fragmented environment in which everybody wants more, and you have to, be a higher percentage of world trade so that everybody wants to use your currency and not threaten the holders of that bonds with freezing their assets. Education, in a lot of public education, is deteriorating. It's a real problem. My wife works to help the poorest school districts, the poorest people in the state of Connecticut. And the state of Connecticut is it's always 1, 2, or 3 in terms of the highest per capita income. And in the state of Connecticut, as of the last survey, 22% of the high school students have either dropped out of high school or have absentee rates which are greater than 25% and are failing classes. So they're living areas that don't have the things I'm talking about parents' nutrition and so on. And there's not adequate resources for them. For example, during COVID, we found that 60,000 students didn't have computers or connectivities to take classes. And the government wasn't going to provide it. So philanthropically, we bought 60,000 computers and give it to the kids, but we can't do that. So our society is, when you look at this, you see drug problems, you see how the cities are changing, the cleanliness of the cities, the education levels of the cities, mental illness, crimes, and so on. You're seeing people fighting with each other a lot. Not all the time. There are wonderful places in the United States. Education, some of the best universities, their pockets, some of the best, their neighborhoods, but there is this encroaching. So you see infrastructure breaking down, school shootings. Okay, so you decide, how are we doing?